bookworms, it's Isla, and this is my June and mid-July wrap-up. You might be wondering why I'm doing a June and mid-July wrap-up. And the reason for that is that tomorrow actually I'm going on a month-long trip. Parts of it will be kind of like a road trip, other parts like, basic tourists in the big city and so forth. So that's going to be a lot of fun, but I'm not really sure how much time I will have in order to film videos for you guys. So you'll be seeing a lot of pre-filmed videos over the next month. And because of that, I decided to split up July so that there will be one wrap-up that will include the books that I read in the first 2 weeks of July, and then my August wrap-up. So the next wrap-up will include both the books that I read in the last 2 weeks of July and in August. So let's begin with the standalones that I read during the last month and a half. The first book that I read, which I actually read on my Kindle Paperwhite, was Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, like half of the booktubers out there. I feel like everybody has been reading this book in order to be prepared for the movie, which actually looks pretty good, and I myself also decided to read it in order to know the story and read the book before the movie. That's like a book lover's first rule. And I have to say that I'm not the biggest fan. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. The book has a very particular sense of humor to it, being that the main character makes jokes all the time and has a certain attitude toward things. And if you're somebody that's the humor that you like in your books, then you probably found this book hilarious and you absolutely loved it. I personally don't like that kind of humor in my books. It just doesn't make me laugh. I like it when, the characters are put in like crazy situations and they're all like wacky and weird and witty, so kind of like The Girl Who Saved the King of Sweden or The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Those are books that make me crack up. This book, not so much. Also, the story itself. I personally thought that nothing really happened for like 80-90% of the book. Only in the last 10% things actually changed from the moment that we started the book. Yeah, 3.5 out of 5 stars. After that, I read a book that I already saw the movie for it a couple of times, so I had a pretty good sense of the story going in, and that was The Host by Stephanie Meyer, which I gave 3 out of 5 stars. I don't really think I need to explain the plot for you guys, since most of you know what this book is about. And on one hand, I really enjoyed how in the book we got so much more backstory and we got all of those little, experiences or things that happened to Wanderer that were new to her that we didn't really get to see in the movie, and I felt like it gave the story so much more soul and it made us really connect more to Wanderer as a character. But, and this is a huge but, the story was so slow. I mean, if I didn't know what was going to happen, if I didn't see the movie, I would have DNF'd this sucker a long time ago, like in the first 200 pages. The plot just crawled along, and like half of the time I'm thinking, come on, Wanderer, keep moving, come on, make the story faster. And I also noticed something, which you could clearly see in the Twilight Saga. Stephanie Meyer is able to create good characters, well-developed characters that start off her story. But as the story moves along, as the love story of our main character moves along, in order to get her characters in the situation and in the couples that she wants them to be in at the end of the book, I feel like the characters start to lose the personality. I don't see myself ever rereading this book, and I feel like the movie was so much better, like, so much better. After those 2 disappointments, I finally picked up a book that was 5 out of 5 stars for me, and that book was A Long Way Down by Nick Hornby. A Long Way Down follows 4 extremely different individuals that all find themselves on top of the same building in London on New Year's Eve, wanting to commit suicide and basically jump off the building. And when they realize that they can't commit suicide in peace, since if each one wants to jump then there's 3 other people looking at him and just waiting for him to jump, they decide to make a pact that nobody's going to commit suicide until Valentine's, which is like the next big date for suicides. And then they set off on like a crazy adventure that night, and by the end they decided they're going to meet up regularly in order to make sure that nobody breaks the pact. And I absolutely loved this book. Some of you may be thinking that this is a dark book, but no, it is so funny. I really liked all the British humor in this book, and I especially liked Jess as a character. She was my favorite. She was just, you know, they're not kidding when they said she's kind of bonkers. Obviously a trigger warning for suicide and depression, but other than that, it's fantastic and I highly recommend it. And the last standalone that I read is a book that I'm not really quite sure how I feel about it, even though a couple of days passed since I finished it. And that book is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This book is kind of like the ocean at the end of the lane. We have our main character who is looking back upon his college years and tells us the story of how he got to this college where he was able to get into this very closed off, very kind of like elite class for people who study ancient Greek and ancient Greek literature. There he met 5 very eccentric students that he became basically a part of their gang, and he basically, because of that, gets a very different college experience. As you can see, I tabbed quite a lot of this book, and that's because Donna Tartt is a phenomenal writer in my eyes. Her writing is amazing. There's no other way to put it. It feels like you start off reading a dream, basically, that slowly turns into a nightmare and then into living hell. I absolutely loved her writing style. I think that just based on that, you should read the book. And the story itself is actually pretty good. I mean, I was surprised all of the time on the way that the story developed. Now, the reason that I said that I'm not quite sure how to feel about this book is that when I finished reading the book, I went online and went into Goodreads and I started reading people's reviews, and people either absolutely hated this book or they absolutely loved it. I'm leaning more towards the loved it group, but I can definitely see and understand what people are saying when they hate this book as well. It's very hard to describe, but it definitely makes you think a lot, and the characters are very different, and the story itself, I feel like the best way to understand is to read the book and see for yourself, because I agree with like both groups. It's just a phenomenal book, and I want to give it 5 out of 5 stars, even though I'm not sure if the feelings that I have for it are positive or negative. But the thing that's keeping me back is that, where you can see I green tabbed the book, is a scene where one character fantasizes about raping another female character. It's like for half a page and then it stops and then he moves on. On one hand, I can totally understand why she put it in the story. Like, throughout the entire book, the characters act in ways that can be very hurtful towards certain groups of society, but I understand why she puts it in there. It's to show, you know, the character, to let you really understand them. And in a sense, I get why she did that as well. Like, it really shows you in what state of mind that character is, and really proves another thing that has been said about the other character. But at the same time, it's still something that really bothers me. So right now, I don't really have a rating for this book, and I don't see myself ever giving it a rating because it's so complicated. Now let's move on to the books that I read that are part of a series. The first book that I read is Fire, and Fire is the second book in the Elfin Gores, apparently I've been saying it wrong all this time, trilogy by Sarah B. Elfragan and Matt Strandberg. I will leave a link down below for the Goodreads page for The Circle, which is the first book in this trilogy. I personally found this book fantastic. 5 out of 5 stars. This sequel is a sequel done right. It doesn't suffer from the whole bridge syndrome, and it kept on with what I loved about the first book, that other than it being, you know, a pretty terrific witch story, there's also all the undertones of all the social issues that are brought up. In this book in particular, we get to delve into the entire issue of a cult. So if you're somebody who is looking for a YA paranormal read that in it has lots of social issues that are talked about, I highly recommend this trilogy. It is fantastic, and a bonus is that this was originally written in Swedish. This is set in Sweden and all of the characters are Swedish, so it makes for a very different kind of setting. And we also learn a bit about like the festivals and the holidays in Sweden, which I really liked. The second book that I read, which is part of also a trilogy, is the first book in a trilogy, which is Pure by Juliana Bagad. Another 5 out of 5 star read for me. I loved it. This is the first book in a YA dystopian trilogy. But no, our main character doesn't come from the poor parts in society and then has something horrible happen to her that leads her into becoming a leader of a rebellion against all the tyrant people in her society. Oh no, she does not suffer from the Katniss syndrome, thank God. And this book, Pure, is set in a dystopian world, one that was already controlling, and then there was nuclear warfare that happened, and it affected people all over the United States. But people were divided into two groups. We had the people that are called the Dome people. Basically, those that were considered to be the only hope of humanity, those that were worth saving, and were put under a gigantic dome. Yes, this kind of sounds like Under the Dome, but no, it's nothing like it, in order to survive the nuclear warfare. But now, 10 years later, they're being programmed all the time. So like kind of like robots, since their personality, their behavior, everything about them can be programmed by the leaders in the dome. And our other group of people are the wretches, as they're called, and they're basically the people who weren't lucky enough to be in the dome when all of the bombs fell, and basically those that didn't die from the radiation, they fused together with objects during the heat wave that there was. So our main character, Precia, for example, fused with the doll that she was holding, so her hand has a doll in it. And they're all different type of characters. We have the beasts that fused with animals, we have the dust that fused with land, with nature, we have the groupies, people that fused with one another. Our two main characters, who are Precia and Patridge, both find themselves running away. Precia is running away because outside, basically this kind of like tyrant government came into power, and they forced every 16-year-old to become a soldier. And those that aren't fit enough to become soldiers become living targets for when the soldiers practice shooting. And Precia knows that because of the doll in her hand, she can't shoot a gun. So she sets out to basically run away from that government and try to save her life. And Patridge is the son of a very, very important man in the dome. And then when his father says something that kind of makes Patridge wonder if his mother survived after all and is living outside the dome, he decides to escape outside of the dome. And that's the only thing that happens in the first 2 chapters. The story is so crazy. It's such a fun ride, and I absolutely recommend this for everybody. And bonus point, no love triangle. Like, you heard me, a YA dystopian with a female protagonist and no love triangle. In this book, at least. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the second or third book in the trilogy, but in this book, no love triangles. And just because of that, you want to pick up this book. Like, this book is fantastic. During the past month and a half, I also read 4 graphic novels, so let's get into them. The first graphic novel that I read was Why the Last Man, which I gave 2 out of 5 stars. Why the Last Man follows this man and this monkey as they find out that after this epidemic that wipes off all main species of Earth, that they basically are the only hope, for humanity, since he's the only man alive, and that monkey is the only, basically, hope for monkeys, I guess. This book is actually very much politically based. Like, I feel that you need to have a little bit of grasp upon the American politics and the Israeli politics in order to truly understand everything in this book, jokes and the plot and everything. And to tell you the truth, for the first half of the book, I actually really did like the story. But then it took off in a direction that I really didn't like, so that's why I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, and I don't really see myself continuing on with this graphic novel series since it doesn't really interest me. I then read Charmed Season 10, Volume 1. You probably don't know this about me, but I am the biggest Charmed fan. And then I spotted this in my local comic book shop, and I was like, I did not read Season 9, nor do I own it, but I need this. And actually there's a pretty good summary of Season 9 on the back, and I loved this book. I loved it. It was so much like the show. Like, they had the entire essence and the soul and the characters, and you know, some of my favorite characters came back, and I was like, ah, just fangirling all the time. I just absolutely loved this graphic novel. But I did give it 4.5 out of 5 stars, and the reason for that has more to do with the art. As you can see on the cover, they are actually drawn very much like the actresses that played the three sisters, the three Halliwell sisters. But there were issues where they were drawn nothing like the actresses, and then there were issues where like exactly like the actresses, and that was super confusing. But other than that, like, fantastic. And then I read Volume 1 and Volume 2 of a graphic novel series that BookTube has been loving. And those volumes are Volume 1 of Rat Queens and Volume 2 of Rat Queens. And I understand the hype now, guys. I absolutely love them both. I gave the first one 4 out of 5 stars, and that's because I felt like the majority of this volume was setting up the story for the next volumes, but the second volume didn't disappoint. It was 5 out of 5 stars. It definitely delivered, like, plot-wise and then backstory-wise as well. Really got a sense of the characters more in this book. Yeah, so those are all the books I read during the past month and a half. Did you read any of them? And if so, let me know what you thought about them down below in the comments. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in my next video. So until then, goodbye!